So, Vanessa, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, and I don't know how much you want to say at the beginning versus just do a Q&A. It's really up to you.
Not too much. The idea of these pieces of paper is that you have like sort of the answers to all the obvious questions. You have my life story, you have a description of how I make a living, what my student attorneys do, which basically is provide free representation to immigrants on immigration matters, but also we've learned that many other types of legal problems have a profound effect on immigration status. And so my student attorneys are preparing to offer a kind of a comprehensive representation to their clients. The concept is that you learn more from doing something than from talking about doing it, or reading about doing it, or even writing about doing it. And the experience itself is both the motivation and the learning mechanism. My students make 1,000 mistakes a week, but that's fine. I make about 300 a week, and so does every other lawyer I know. You can't be a professional, someone whose job it is to assist people in making difficult and frightening decisions without making a lot of mistakes. And the only thing you can tell yourself is, it's better for them than if they had no one. And it's better for them than if they had most of the lawyers who are walking around. And all we can do for our clients is the best we can do. And that is particularly true in immigration, where most of the time we don't win, we can't win, we're going up against the government. All of the legal standards, burdens of proof, evidentiary standards, everything is tilted strongly against the immigrant. But at least our clients, if they are deported, and many of them are, not all of them, but many, leave knowing that we did everything that could be done, that we turned over every rock. And that seems to be important. Yes?
Now, why is it that the U.S. doesn't consider this a criminal act? Because if they did, they would be afforded representation under the amendment,
Sixth Amendment, that's right.
Where they would be afforded counsel if they can't afford their own. This is treated as a civil kind of offense.
That's exactly right.
And if that's the case, why are these being treated almost as criminals, but not being classified as such?
They are treated as criminal in almost every conceivable way, other than getting free counsel and having the same constitutional safeguards that criminals, people accused of being criminals, receive. Immigrants are basically not covered by most constitutional rights. As you say, there's no appointed counsel, and the statistics on the difference it makes when you have representation are absolutely stunning. A study that was done in the New York Immigration Court a couple of years back by a combination actually of law school clinics, this is a very interesting project, found that just roughly, I don't have the precise numbers here, but about 87% of the people who were both incarcerated and without counsel were deported. About 70% of the people who were incarcerated but had counsel were deported. About 40% of the people who were not incarcerated but had counsel were deported. And only about 12% of the people who were not incarcerated and had counsel were deported. The variation is very, very large. And the only variable that really explains it is the combination of not being incarcerated while your case is pending and having decent, competent counsel, which is not easy to come by. The reason I do this clinic is because most lawyers who represent immigrants are despicable scumbags. And they rip off their clients, they take advantage of their clients, they lie to their clients, they cheat their clients, they steal from their clients, and they get away with all of it because their clients are ultimately deported. It's a really great scam. And I am trying to create, and I am happy to say that I have now 9 graduates of my program who have set up their own firms and are providing decent, competent, ethical representation at an affordable price and making a pretty good living. And I am pleased about that. There was some other hand, sir.
In the statistic that you just mentioned, 12% incarceration, is that incarceration a consequence of their immigrant status, or is it incarceration involving some other crime?
Oh, no, I'm not talking about incarceration that is a function of another crime. That does happen. But what I'm talking about is a great number of asylum seekers, of people who overstayed visas, of people who overstayed student visas, of people who overstayed fiancé visas, and I could go on. While they are in the deportation process, they are incarcerated. It is a very expensive system. About 5 years ago, they started to use ankle bracelets. And they are using ankle bracelets to some extent, and that has helped. But for example, if you look at the women and children, it's 100% women and children at the southern border, people who I think fairly can be characterized as refugees from Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador. They are all locked up in very unpleasant and uncomfortable facilities, and it's pretty much blatantly acknowledged that the purpose of that is to discourage people from coming and to make people want to leave. There was somebody else over here, no? Yes, sir.
Now, I don't understand how they can use the legal means of incarceration when this is not a criminalized offense. If it's supposed to be...
You're right to be confused. Immigrants have no rights in this country. When you're a non-citizen in this country, the only constitutional right that applies is the right to due process of law, which is a very vague and broad...
But only in criminal proceedings rather than civil suits.
Well, if an immigrant were arrested and placed in a criminal process, it would have a lawyer, it would have a right against self-incrimination, would have a right to confront and cross-examine witnesses, would have many rights. But an immigrant who is going through the deportation process is not entitled to very many rights at all.
But it's not considered a punishment, right? It's just more of a, you're getting...
It's specifically not considered a punishment.
If it was, then they'd have to classify it as criminal.
Well, I mean, somewhere there's kind of a murky line in there, but yes, I think, I mean, everywhere else in every other part of our legal system, if you are facing up to or more than 60 days, excuse me, not up to, 60 days or more of incarceration, you must be, for example, afforded a lawyer, a free lawyer. That's across the country, that's a constitutional right. So that's the situation, and that's, you know, what we're trying to do in most cases. Many of our clients do have claims. They do have valid claims to some type of status based on either family work or other, if you're the victim of certain crimes, you might qualify for status. If your grandfather was a citizen, you might qualify, of the United States, you might qualify for status. If your country is temporarily in a disaster mode, for example, Syria. There are a small group of Syrians. It's so funny for me to listen to these folks running around terrified of Syrians. We already, 2 years ago, we declared what is called temporary protected status, just as we did for Haitians after the earthquake, just as we did after some other huge storms, hurricanes, tornadoes, very, very destructive things. And for Syrians, because of the horrific situation in the country. But the thing about temporary protected status, yes, it helps the citizens of that country if they're already in the United States. And you must be in the United States the day before the disaster is declared. And if you arrive in the United States after that, you don't qualify. So there are a lot of kind of paradoxical aspects to the immigration law. But what people don't, when people start characterizing and generalizing about immigrants, they don't realize that there are about 75 to 80 different statuses for immigrants in this country. That's the law. Whether you know, if you want to change the law, fine, but right now that's the law. And what people don't realize is many people would qualify for one of those statuses if they just had a lawyer to help them, because it's extremely complicated. We can barely understand it ourselves, and there's no way that a person of limited English literacy, locked up without access to the internet or anything else, could possibly present the evidence to qualify for that status. But anyway, I'd like to hear about some of your experiences and what you thought. First of all, can't help asking, did any of the people you interviewed complain about their lawyers? Yes?
Not really. Our person that we interviewed, well, their guardian, complained about the questions that we were asking.
That you were asking?
We were asking.
That you were asking. Why? What were you asking?
They felt that we got personal with asking our source things, because we were like asking about like insurance and things along those lines, and then the guardian was like, why are you getting like so personal? I thought this was supposed to be about immigration, so I don't know what kind of like pretense.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, they were giving me.
What do you want to do with your life is a personal.
Well, we were also asking about her friends, things.
Yeah.
Stuff like that, so.
You know, I guess it's interesting, right? People from different cultures also have different reactions to certain information is more or less private, and that might have been part of what you were experiencing. Did anybody else run into kind of suspicion or mistrust or concern about who you were or what you were up to? I wondered about that because I almost hope you're going to tell me that they did express that.
I think our guy was also under the impression like this was going to be published in like a newspaper too. They didn't, like, fully
So what
understand.
did you tell him about that?
No, we just told him that it was a school project, but he was like, "We're telling you all this, and we don't know what we're going to do with it."
So he was mistrustful.
Yeah, it was mistrustful.
Yeah, well, that is one of the challenges that we run into as lawyers. I mean, almost everybody who ends up in our clinic has already been badly taken advantage of and abused by a lawyer, or by what we call notarios, a quasi-lawyer. And so we have to overcome that even before we can get close to getting accurate information to questions. I mean, the questions you were asking are kind of questions that are very important to us. What do you want to do with your life? I mean, sometimes I really want to say to someone, this country is not very welcoming to people in your situation. Are you really sure that you do want to stay here? You know, have you really thought about the options here? And it is very personal. But that's part of what a good lawyer tries to do, and I guess to some extent a good journalist, if you're trying to get an accurate understanding of what this person is really about, and you know what would be interesting and enlightening about this person to others, I think it seems to me you must get into somewhat personal questions. Did any of you ask people why they came to this country? No?
My person came from Guatemala, and he's young. He's now 21, but he came when he was a teenager, and he was trying to get away from gangs and violence and drugs and poverty, that sort of thing.
Yeah, that is the primary driver for the folks from Central America. Most people, in my experience, are not very comfortable acknowledging fear. So this is a real challenge and a real barrier for us, because one of the primary bases for seeking status in the United States is fear of persecution in your country of origin. And yet people know that intellectually, but it's very hard for someone to, especially men talking to women, It's just a reality. It's hard for them to acknowledge that they're afraid, that they don't want to talk about horrible experiences. They don't want to talk about seeing, like one of our clients, I believe one of the clients you interviewed, I don't know if you got to this, but his younger sister with her hands and feet cut off, and she'd been raped many times in the gutter right outside their house. It took us a very, very, very long time to find out that information. And we were lucky because my student attorneys take the time, they have the time, they make the time to really engage with people. But not too many lawyers do that. Not too many people, you know, it's just not possible. And so a lot of information that would be supportive never gets to the point where it's presented to the decision makers. It's a challenge.
How often would you say the cases that you deal with are people who qualify for asylum, or people who you would consider to be asylum cases versus other kinds of cases?
Well, first of all, we do not look for asylum cases, because asylum cases, that's where someone is seeking temporary or permanent refuge in the United States based on having been persecuted either by the government of the country of origin, or the government is unable to control the people who are persecuting. Typically, for example, the gangs, the cartels. Sometimes, religious, authoritarian religious figures, and you could, or just sometimes just rich and powerful people that the government cannot possibly protect anybody from. The reason we don't look for asylum cases is because these are the cases that lots of, how can I put it? Well, big law firms, big, powerful, important lawyers, they like to do what is called, they don't really like to do it always, but they feel they must do pro bono work, okay? This is volunteer lawyering for people who could not ever afford their prices. You know, these are people who charge $600-700 an hour for legal services. And they love asylum cases. They love people who've been tortured. They love it when somebody's house, village was burned down. They love it when, a pregnant woman had a baby cut out of her. I mean, all of that. And they have the resources to do things like hire experts and commission studies. Actually, they sometimes hire journalists to go and gather information and that will back up the asylum claims, because the government is very, very suspicious of asylum claims. Okay, parenthesis again. I'm afraid I speak in constant spiraling digressions. So I don't think it's completely unreasonable for the government to be somewhat suspicious of asylum claims. We have to have a different standard of proof for asylum claims, because so often people come with the shirt on their backs, without even shoes on their feet. They don't have any documents. Their documents have been lost, shredded, you name it. This is very, very common. And we know that there's a cottage industry out there of bad, awful lawyers and notarios who collect money from people. They have little card tables. They sit out on the sidewalk in Brooklyn and Queens and Spring Valley, and they tell people, green card, $500, no problema, and right? You know this? And they all uniformly, instead of digging into what really might be a legitimate basis for status, they all claim asylum. And they come up with the most preposterous canned stories. And they write them up. They get people to sign them, often without even reading them or not understanding what they're reading. And this is very, very destructive. It's not only stealing your money, because this is not going to work for the most part. The government is not that stupid. But it also there's a very strict rule. If the government concludes that you have made a misrepresentation of fact in the course of seeking status, you are barred from any status in the United States forever. That's it. Misrepresentation equals deportation equals inadmissibility forever. So these lawyers and such are not only they're stealing the chance that people might have had for a legitimate claim. It's a terrible problem. Okay. That said, I mean, so there are quite a few fraudulent asylum claims that are filed. And I have to acknowledge that reality. I think asylum claims have to be substantiated with very, very, very compelling evidence and backup witnesses, backup documents, backup newspaper stories. Newspaper stories are probably one of the most important ways that asylum claims are established. Most people will say, you'll see this all the time in decisions, if there really had been 500 Kenyan union leaders, herded into a corral and burned to death, there would have been a newspaper story about it, and there is no newspaper story about it. That appears in many decisions. So for our program, I think it makes sense to leave the asylum cases more to the very rich lawyers who have the resources and have the capacity to do the right job. We do some. This year we did a female genital mutilation case from Senegal involving 3 little girls whose grandmother and aunt were trying desperately to cut them. We did a Ukrainian case involving a police officer, fairly high-ranking police officer, who blew the whistle, perhaps very foolishly, on corruption, serious corruption in a Ukrainian police force. And he very nearly was killed. He was pursued. He was chained into a stone building for like 3 weeks with nothing. Anyway, but we did win the FGM case. We did not win the Ukrainian case. And we have, of course, well, not of course, I shouldn't say of course, but we have a number of women from Central America, women with small children, who from the time they were maybe 10, 11, 12 years old, the gang guys, these gangs are not like anything that we know of gangs. They are a very, 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 they're a little bit like ISIS, actually. They're actually quite a bit like ISIS. I mean, they frequently cut off people's heads, for example. And they do engage in very horrible behavior. And one of the things they do is they will pick out a girl from a family and say that she's now his girl or his leader's girl. And if she resists, or if anybody tries to interfere, especially anybody from the family tries to interfere, the whole family will be killed in various particularly gruesome ways. And this happens a great deal. So we have about 3 of the cases involving women with small children who are in that horrible kind of situation. I mean, they were raped. They were essentially gang raped from the time they were very young. The children are the product of those rapes. And they're just kind of really messed up psychologically. They're doing, some of them, we're in court today with one. They're doing well comparatively because at least they're not thinking this is going to happen every day. But those cases, I feel that we do offer something special because our students, my students, as I said, they spend the time and they take the time and they work with them until they feel safe enough to be able to talk to them. Yeah?
Is it possible if an immigrant is denied status here, or if it's imminent that that's going to occur, are you able to try to, if not leave,
Go somewhere else?
Go somewhere else, exactly.
Yeah, people do, not very successfully. The general rule a lot of this all comes out of international law. I never thought that I was going to end up being involved in international law. It's very complicated, but it grows out of international treaty obligations. And the principle of non-refoulement, not returning a vulnerable person to an unsafe place, holds that that should be provided by the first country that the person goes to. And only if that first country is unable to provide safety, then is the person supposed to be allowed to go to another place. But for example, we have clients who try to go to Canada, and I've never known of one who actually got in lawfully. But I know people I have heard of, I don't know them, I've heard of people who have gone to Australia, but this was a long time ago. Australia has become very, very protective, negative towards immigrants.
Would there be any other international place in Europe or elsewhere where some of these immigrants from Central America can go after the U.S.?
I think the Europeans are feeling not so...
I mean not now. Prior to what has recently occurred, was that an option?
So the people who come here, you know, some of them walk. Like some of the people from Peru and Ecuador and Colombia and Bolivia, they walk, you know, a couple of thousand miles. Some people take very, very dangerous trains. The gangs pursue the immigrants all the way up through the whole pathway. It's a very dangerous, debilitating, difficult journey. I can't envision. I mean, maybe if somebody, some good Samaritan, had a boat or something that pulled up, you know, and offered to take people on board and try to take them, but where? I mean, I don't know of a country. Maybe some of you do. I don't know of a country that is going to be receptive in that way. Mostly, ooh, that hurts.
No, it's okay.
That hurts.
Sure.
It's invisible. It's been
He didn't want any of that data anyway. I mean, the thing is that, you know, people have such ambivalence about immigrants. I have to say to you, I did a lot of different things as a lawyer. I never dreamt I would be doing immigration law. One thing I did was criminal defense work, and I was representing axe murderers. I mean, real axe murderers. I mean, that's what I did. And, you know, and every so often I would speak out and go write a column for a little newspaper, something like that, on an issue or whatever. That was fine. Then I started doing immigration work, and then I got much more involved in kind of advocacy, because I believe that this is a field where lawyers have a responsibility to look beyond the individual clients, but to the actual policies, not just for the people who are seeking status, but for our country. I feel like our country is in grave, grave risk. And we need knowledge and clarity and understanding, and not mythology.
Risk of what?
What?
Risk of what? You think that the United States is in risk of what?
Losing its soul. This is a nation of immigrants. Happy Thanksgiving. So, I guess, you know, I'm looking for, you know, I try to play some role in clarifying. There's so many myths, so completely just crazy, made up nonsense. And so I will try sometimes appear on a radio station or write something. And I get, you know, invariably, the next thing that happens is that on my office phone, answering machine, there are all these hideous threats, and, you know, people who just are expressing how I should die and how badly I should die, and how, you know, I don't listen to it because it's a little disturbing, but you know, people tell me what it says, more or less. It's so interesting. I think it's something about, I don't know. I'm still trying to understand the phenomenon. Why do people react to the notion? I mean, we are human beings, after all, no? I mean, and those lines on the earth our lines are artificial lines. They're not lines that were made by God. And so it's very perplexing. This is, I don't feel like I really know what I'm doing very much at all. Yeah.
For the burden of proof, of
Are you thinking of going to law school?
sorry?
Are you thinking of going to law school?
I'm not sure, but,
We could use somebody. Yeah, okay, go ahead.
Don't take them away from us. We're planning to
Well,
be-
that's exactly what I'm planning to do.
uh,
We need people with journalistic instincts, yeah.
just for what is needed for them to legally, lawfully maintain any type of legal status here rather than getting deported? Because I'm not sure exactly what they need for that.
Well, here's the problem. People always say, oh, well, you just marry an American. Lots of people are told that. And lots of people, and again, that's the financial, whole elaborate scheme gets worked out, mail order brides, whatever you want to call it. There's only one problem. If you aren't lawfully admitted with a proper visa, then marrying an American doesn't do a damn thing for you. I'll tell you one way you can get in this country, and you could be an absolute, you could definitely be an ISIS leader, and you could get in this country so easily if you only had $500,000, which of course they make every day in oil. If you show up with $500,000 and you promise to start a business and employ 10 people for at least 1 year, you get not just a visa, you get a green card.
Is that easy?
All you need is 500,000?
500,000 if you invest in the disadvantaged areas, like the Bronx, okay? Otherwise, it's $1 million. If you want to put your money into, Scarsdale, it's $1 million. But I find this, and I'm making fun a little bit. I have to, okay, I guess it's legitimate for a country to say we want to attract investment. But there's something so,
But you're bringing an ethical issue into dollars and cents rather than the humanity of it. You're making it so that you have to, if you have a certain amount of money or a certain amount of wealth, you can just bypass all of these things that other people of lesser income can't do.
well, I guess the assumption, right, is that people that have that kind of money are better people, no?
Is this like an instant process? Like you'd be able to do this in like a month and like instantly get your green card?
I'm sorry?
Is this like how fast is the process?
Are you interested? I can get you good representation.
How do you have a green card?
It's not really instant, but it's remarkably fast. And depending, there are fixers in Washington, D.C., in Brooklyn, in Silicon Valley, various places who know how to do this particular route very, very smoothly, and who know exactly who to talk to at USCIS or in Washington. So if you can hire, and you hire one of these guys, probably in about 6 weeks.
I have friends that have been here for years and still don't have their green card.
Just smack them up the side of the head. No, I mean what does that say about us as a country? I mean, what does it say? I put the question to you: does it disturb you, or not? Do you think it's okay? You think it's cool?
I don't think it's good. My friend is like really trying desperately to get her green card, and the fact that someone with $500,000 could just be like, "I'm going to start a business," that bothers me.
I mean,
No.
I have questions for further information on that. Would that be different regarding where they're coming from?
Nope.
If they came from, let's say, Central America?
Not right now. Not right
That
now.
seems like-
Some people think the next thing that's going to happen is that, because believe me, I mean, this is anecdotal, okay, I haven't studied, but I can tell you, a very large number of investor visas, EB-5s they're called, have gone to people from Dubai and from Saudi Arabia and from anyway, I'm just saying. I mean, that's not to say there's anything wrong with that. It's just so ironic to me that the same, that at the same time, people are flipping out. Yes, sir.
So if an American citizen was to marry someone who wasn't from here, but let's just say it wasn't like a bad thing, like it was a legitimate relationship.
A real marriage, yes.
Yeah, then how would the other person become an American citizen?
Well, it would be a long drink of water unless the other person had entered the United States lawfully. And, there's a big split. People who enter the United States either with a false passport, false visa, cross the border without going through a point of entry. And it's interesting, an awful lot of people are coming in through Canada now. The Mexican border is fallen way off, and a lot of people are coming through Canada because you could walk into the woods in Maine. In Canada, and just pop up in Maine. It's really a lot less strenuous than whatever. If you did enter the United States lawfully, then the process is. The American spouse petitions. There is a lengthy application form. You have to show what's called affidavits of support. You have to show that the person will not require public assistance. You have to show health. The person has to have a comprehensive medical examination, very expensive, by the way, almost $900. You have to go through an interview, and if there's any question at all about whether it is a legitimate marriage, the best thing is if you have like 5 kids. 5 kids under the age of 5. Okay, you're in. You're coming in. Okay, but if we've just to give you an idea, suspicion arises for many reasons. We had a case involving a guy who's a really, really tough guy. Had spent a long time in prison. He was covered with tattoos from top to bottom.
Prison in the U.S. or from this
He was an American citizen, and he had a serious drug problem. And while he had AIDS, and while he was in an AIDS treatment facility, he met this beautiful, delicate young woman from Uganda who also had AIDS because she had been raped repeatedly while she was in a camp. And they fell in love. They got married. They came to us. We took them, and she was she was so well spoken. She had the most exquisite British accent. She sounded like poetry when she was speaking. And she was just delicate and always beautifully dressed and had the most gracious manners and so on. And this guy was like an escapee from whatever. But they had a spiritual bond. They both were born again Christians, and they were very devoted to each other. And his parents repeatedly told us, you have to keep her here. You have to keep her here because she is the only thing keeping him alive. He will kill himself one way or another, whether it's with heroin or whatever. And she made him eat, and she made him exercise, and she made him hygiene and all of this stuff. Well, when we got to the interview, this was in Philly, the interview went on for 7 hours. They interviewed them separately. They actually brought in 2. They had 2. It was the first time I'd ever seen 2 officers in an interview. They were double teaming them. They took breaks. They traded off. They interviewed her without him without her, trying to come up with all kinds of problems. And they finally came up with something, which is when they turned to her and said, so do you know that your husband, before his last prison term, was convicted of child molestation? And their position was that if it was a true marriage, real, genuine, honest-to-God marriage, of course he would have told her that, which she did not know. She fainted dead away, actually. But the real issue there, I think, was that he was a big white guy with, this particular presentation, and she was a beautiful, delicate young black woman. And I think that the interviewers could not handle that. So I only tell you that story to illustrate that even this was a total. I mean, they continue to be married. The end of the story is, yes, we are working on her citizenship right now, but it wasn't easy. It took a lot of time, and if they hadn't had free lawyers, if they had been paying lawyers by the hour or anything like that, it never would have happened for them, because we had to write a lot of briefs. We had to, challenge. We had to deal with a lot of stuff, and this is the problem. For many Americans, U.S. citizens, it's pretty straightforward. But I can also tell you that I have a special little circle in my office of all the couples who are PhDs or MDs or engineers. Okay, people are supposed to be really well educated and really know what they're doing, right? Who completely and totally fucked up their application and got themselves in serious trouble. Because that's how complicated it is, that's how difficult it is, and that's how they set it up, in my opinion, to make it hard for people to get through.
What are the kinds of questions that they ask them?
Oh, they want to know what color is your toothbrush, what color is his toothbrush, what side of the bed do you sleep on, when was the last time you had sex, where does he keep his bowling ball, where does she keep her bikini? I mean, very, very searching questions, looking for a discrepancy or an inconsistency for the most part. And they're good at it. Yeah, I mean, they do catch people who are trying to pull something off. Yeah. I'm sorry. I think you didn't you have a question?
Oh yeah, I was about the Justice Clinic. I wanted to ask if the Justice Clinic, aside from providing a legal representation, do they do any other forms of advocacy within the community?
Yes, we do. Each student is responsible working with some other students who are going out and doing a community education program, either at a church or a mosque, a synagogue, a community center. And we do a lot of legislative advocacy. We do legislative advocacy. We're doing it right now for funding for immigrant organizations in the county of Westchester. The county executive has 3 days ago eliminated all funding for any organization in the county of Westchester that provides assistance to immigrants. A not too subtle way of demonstrating his position on, I guess, whatever. So we're working on that, putting together materials and stories. I mean, the same things that we need on the one hand, materials like this. We need statistics and information, but we also need stories to explain why it's so counterproductive. So those are two types of non-casework, which activity that I think any competent immigration lawyer ought to engage in. It also is an important way of building trust in the community. When people see you bringing them information, bringing them what they need to know for free in a way that is accessible to them, or when people see you advocating on their behalf at all levels of government. We're also running a state campaign so that immigrants who are victims of the bad lawyers I've been talking about. Remember I said that there's certain visas you can get if you are a victim of certain serious crimes, like robbery, arson, burglary, things like this. Well, in my humble opinion, when immigrants are ripped off by lawyers who steal, as I said, not just their money, but their future and their hope, that too should qualify for the same status. And we're trying to get the state legislature to change the law in some regards, so that the state level, and then every spring we go to Washington, D.C., and we're part of a team for 3 days, lobbying. We're set up to and trying to educate legislators. And let me tell you, that is the pits. It is so hard. They are just so hard-headed and so resistant, and they really don't want to know the information, you know, because that will complicate their lives. But the students are really good, and the students are effective. You should not ever underestimate. In some ways, you can be more effective now, certainly as an advocate, than in your future lives, because powerful people are a little embarrassed to look like morons in front of a nice, fresh student, you know? And they will respond sometimes. You can push further than I can. If I push to a certain level, I'm being pushy. I'm a pushy broad. But you can do it, and the legislator will accept, oh, well, he's young, he's enthusiastic, it's important to him, and he wants, you know, it definitely has an impact. I've seen it. Yes?
How often can a legal status be revoked? Like, if someone found out after they got their legal status, and they found out it was unlawful or something, how common or how easily can that be revoked?
Very common.
Like,
If the government finds out, if the government gets a hint, or, you know, there's certain kinds of misconduct. Even when you're a citizen, if you're not a natural born citizen, you can get your citizenship can be revoked. It's rare. That is rare. But your green card status, that happens. One of the most common ways it happens, again, they make the law so complicated. You can leave the United States and travel when you have a green card. But if you stay a day, a minute, over 6 months outside the United States, they can revoke your green card. Well, some people know that and understand it, and other people don't. And we actually had a case, get this guy was Iranian. Okay, so now you would think, he's an Iranian poet and musician who fled the Shah and the whole thing, and even worse were the Ayatollahs, because they don't like music and poetry and all that. And this guy had his green card. He goes back to Iran because his father is dying. This is what always gets people. They always go back because their father or their mother or somebody's dying. And then his mother is asking, you know, please, you have to help me. You know, your brothers and sisters are all over Europe. You know, I'm all left here by myself. I'm 82 years old, blah, blah, blah. He ends up spending like a year and a half dealing with her issues, getting her set up, getting a house, getting her okay. And then, unfortunately, he gets snatched by Ayatollahs because he's walking around, a real dumbass move, he's walking around wearing blue jeans. Okay, you don't do that in Iran. And he spends the next 8 years in prison, a sort of prison camp in Jewel. And it's very dramatic. He escapes. He gets on a horse. He rides the horse over the mountains into Turkey. I mean, it's great, right? He contacts his brother. His brother sets him up. He gets the ticket. He still has his old green card from, so he gets on a ticket to go back to his home in Detroit. And you know, when he gets off the plane in Detroit, there's a picture of this. He falls down on the ground and he's kissing the ground. Okay, he's kissing the earth. Okay, and 2 ICE officers come over and grab him, and they threw him into ICE detention. They revoked his green card, and it took us 5 years to get it back. So.
Like, do they know he was in prison?
Well, eventually, I mean, he did tell them, and he did have, you know, he had a lot of supporting evidence to that effect. But it took us. We had to litigate it at the trial level, go to the Board of Immigration Appeals level, then go up to the circuit court level, come back down, et cetera, until we were able to prove that. And even then, we actually didn't get his green card back. We got him asylum, and he started all over again on the whole green card path. He didn't actually get his green card back. We got him asylum based on the 8 years in prison, but.
So there are no exceptions to prior to
Yeah, what?
beyond 6 months? Like, I would think, like, your father died in
you know, this guy was a musician, you know, he left his piano, one of our songs, he left his beloved grand piano in his apartment. When he left, he thought he was going for a month. And it was like one thing after another, after another, after another. And he wasn't really thinking about that. He wasn't focused. And he'd had a green card since he was 17 years old. He was now in his 60s. I mean, he just wasn't thinking about it. But this is what happens to people. The rules are very, very intricate, and the administration of the rules is very, very, very unforgiving. If you are an immigrant in this country, you have to not make any mistakes if you want to stay here. I have a feeling we're running out of time, no?
We've got a little under 10 minutes. I'm gonna take
Well, I don't know if you want to do anything else.
just a couple minutes to answer over.
Okay.
Time for another question or two.
Is there anybody who hasn't spoken or have anything, any thoughts, any reactions, is any of this news to you?
So this was an issue that came up when we were just discussing individual cases earlier today. How do you manage the fact that often these cases stretch out over many years, and your staff is law students who I'm assuming change out every year?
Every year.
So how do you
Well, the first and most important thing is that when we're offering representation to clients, we explain that that's going to be a feature of this. Your lawyer is going to change every year. Now, that, of course, can happen with any lawyer, in any office, any firm. Most lawyers don't think about it very much and don't bring it up. We do mention it. We try to maintain really, really, really excellent case logs and records of everything that happens and everything that goes on, including both, we have two separate categories, facts and impressions, because it's very important to have both. But to answer your question, number one, my student attorneys are very harsh toward their predecessors on their cases. They typically are very unforgiving of them, and they don't like. They want all. I keep saying to my student attorneys, you know, your life is not an endless series of virgins. Okay, you're not going to always be the first to, and you might as well get used to it. But they would prefer it that way. It's clear. And you know, we try by record keeping, and the one advantage I say to the clients is, they are getting different lawyers' perspectives. They're getting different lawyers who can maybe see something that the other, and this happens all the time, that the previous pair of lawyers did not see. Or that maybe the third pair of lawyers is the one that the client can really connect with, can really feel comfortable with. And we learn more than we ever learned before. This is very, very common. So it can be sort of an advantage to the client. And the other reason it's a bit of an advantage is most lawyers, after you invest a certain amount of time and energy in a case, and these cases are very demanding for lawyers, you just get kind of, I just want it to be over. I really don't care anymore. I just want it to be over. I can't take it. I'm going to be bequeathing this case to my grandchildren. I can't handle it. It's just, I want it to go away. That was how I felt about the poor Ukrainian guy. We represented him for 7 years. But the flip of it is that the adversary, the government, for once, they're up against an adversary, they're up against representatives who are not going away either, who are not going to fold. Every year there's a new lawyer, and that lawyer, you know, gets geared up and hot to fight, and the government learns that, you know, we just don't go away. Other lawyers fold after a while. They get better, quote, better cases. They want to get rid of this case, settle it, be done, move on to another case or something. We're not under those pressures. So we can offer the client, despite the lack of continuity, which definitely is a disadvantage, we can still offer the client some compensation for that.
Well, thank you so much for being here.
Well, Let me just say that, if I may, I was so happy when Professor Fink approached me about, working with you a little bit, because I'm very, very, very concerned about the state of journalism in this country with regard to immigration and immigrants. It is appallingly ignorant. It is appallingly uninformed and lacking in perspective, in insight, every day, I look, oh my God, I look on Facebook or something and it's just so pitiful but so awful. And the impact is enormous. I mean, really, more so than in many other public policy issues, people really accept that what they read in the papers or what they see on TV about immigrants and immigration is the way it is. So if any of you do end up pursuing this as an interest in journalism, you will be doing a wonderful thing. You will be doing a very, very needed, necessary thing. And if you can bring real depth, sophistication, and if you're willing to take the time, as you did today, to try to communicate with the lawyers who are trying to help people and listen to the explanations so that you understand the totality of what's going on, that would be a tremendous contribution. And that's why I'm very happy that you have, whatever interest you have, it's great that you're willing to pay attention to this aspect of our lives in this country. So, thank you.
Thank you. Did everyone get the handouts? Because there were 3 different ones.